Hello and welcome to Reframe. The spotlight right now is on somebody who spent 29 years of her life understanding the space of mental health and helping others understand and interpret themselves far better. Joining me now is Anna Chandy. Thanks very much, Anna.
It's a pleasure to be on your show, Shaili.
Thanks so much. I have been tracking your work for a while now, and I really feel extremely empowered to see how you talk about a brave new you. Can you explain to us how all these 29 years, a great deal of what you've done in mental health, has been about what we think of ourselves?
I think for me, what's key about a brave new you is I have a fundamental belief which is influenced by a psychologist called Carl Rogers that says every individual has their own internal resources and potential and capacity to thrive and blossom. That's my fundamental belief. And each of us can thrive and blossom if we are given adequate support and nurture. And for me, braveness is not about, achieving success, achieving fame, achieving all what we call the physical realities. To me, braveness is embracing who you are, both your shadows, your dark sides, and your brighter side, and living a life of authenticity and being whole.
So, when you say that, like a lot of the times we ask ourselves that important question, hey, but when things are not going great, and let's say somebody's going through a mental health crisis, which I personally think everyone goes through at different points in time, somebody worse, somebody a little less, we're in the dumps. How do we tell ourselves all these things that you want us to tell ourselves?
I think there are two aspects to this. One is when, as you said, when we are down in the dumps or we are in that dark space, we need to believe a key essential human need, and that is survival. And for our survival at that point, if we are able to account and acknowledge our dark space and our vulnerabilities and reach out for support, I think from there, the journey begins about how you will come out of the dark space. Now, when I say support, I'm talking about support that gives you a sense of psychological protection and a sense of feeling non-judgmental. Today, when we look at around all around us, or in fact, this morning, that was what I was thinking. We seem as a collective so focused on punitive, hounding, and shaming people. So I think it's important for us to realize that we need to give support for people to thrive and blossom. And that support, especially to people who are in dark spaces, only comes from being non judgmental and psychological protection.
So when one does reach out for support, one is also often wondering whether one is going to land up in a lecture. That's one of the things that one gets really hassled with, that there are so many advocates talking about this, but there isn't enough meaningful, what shall I say, a good mix of empathy and support. In your experience, how can people who are giving the support system or those reaching out for it make this happen in the right way?
I think I'd first like to highlight what you said, which is very important. That is, that when you go to somebody for support, you are not going there to get lectured. When a person gives empathetic support, and if they are giving empathetic support that is non judgmental and providing psychological protection, what that support would in turn convey or convert would be the individual will be able to actually receive their own answers from the kind of compassionate inquiry the person who's giving the support is inquiring. And the reason I say compassionate inquiry is that Enquiry can be two ways. There's a difference between compassionate enquiry and interrogation. And compassionate inquiry is actually to facilitate that the individual is able to make meaning of their own experiences, even in a dark space. And from that meaning will arise a nugget of, or a nugget of real gold, a pot of gold, for them to begin their journey of recovery and healing. And I say this with absolute confidence because I am a living example of an individual who's come through dark spaces. I'm not a therapist who's a therapist because of my qualifications. I have become a therapist because I had to undergo and understand my own dark spaces and my own dark pain.
Yeah. So Anna, if you are okay to talk a little bit about that, I'm aware of the fact that for you, this experience, your entire effort towards others has been an outcome of your own personal experiences. So what really, sort of put you through them? How did you overcome them? And also, when having gone through that, the way you reach out to others to make that connection.
So, just a brief, I was born into a family which was highly dysfunctional and conflictual, so I don't have any happy memory. But some of the byproducts of this conflictual family was I was sent to different homes because of the conflict at home, and I ended up actually being sexually abused. I'm a survivor of abuse by three people, members, relatives of the extended family. I lived with this deep, dark secret, and finally, when I came out, I was actually ostracized by my own family, extended family. Even today, most of them don't talk to me because they felt that I had brought shame on the family by talking about it. But during that journey, because I was a young mother and I realized my own anxieties that it would impact my children, I started therapy, and although I was a therapist, and there was this one therapist who stood by me through this entire journey. She conveyed empathy. She gave me protection, psychological protection. And when you say psychological protection, she kind of a potent therapist will silence the voice in your own head, your own inner critique, which can actually pull you down. And she helped me access aspects of myself that enable me to come out of the dark hole, enable me to thrive. And therefore, I have only one goal in life, and even now, and that is that I empathize with a person even when I go into a social setting. I can recognize people in pain, although they may be, bubbly and cheery and putting up what you say, it's showcasing another version of themselves. I see through that, and that's been my personal experience. So I think for me, this is what therapy's been about, and I think my team and or anybody I train and work with, I always say a good therapist is one who deals with their own dark holes. Because Shelley, there is none of us, there is nobody in the world without a story. If you're born, you will have a story. And therefore, I believe that we can work through all our stories.
So I think one of the things that you hit upon is also recognizing when we go through this and being able to talk to ourselves and not shun our own selves away. So identifying the issue and coming face to face is perhaps the first step and the hardest one.
It's the first step, it's the hardest one, and the most healing one. Because two, there are two ways to look at dark spaces. You deal with a lot of shame, and you deal with a lot of pain. And you have experienced both. And when you face both, in fact, for me, more than pain, when an individual comes out through the dark tunnel of shame, and especially public shame, they develop their own inner core steel armor of strength, which just becomes an impetus and just becomes kind of fuel for them to move ahead and thrive and blossom.
Yeah. So, Anna, today we live in a very digitally connected world. It's a post pandemic scenario. Women have been inundated with work, emotional stress, their own personal feelings, and a sense of like, is this what I came to the world for? Constantly do everything for everybody and now being stuck in a pandemic. Where is my own life? Pandemic has changed a lot. What are you observing? Especially the kind of trauma a lot of women are coming through with.
I think the different age categories are observing different kind of difficulties. For example, I see a large number of women, say between the ages of 20 and 30, primarily difficulties with relationships because of the pandemic, which has become much more accentuated, loneliness because of the social isolation, and also with this need to actually both make both their professional domain and their personal domain, how do they actually bridge them so that they can manage both? Women between 30s and 40s who are working and also mothers, etc., struggling with having children at home. How do you manage these boundaries between professional and personal, and working from home, and also the demands of young children who really have not understood what has happened in the last 18 months, trying to help children make meaning. Older women between 40 and 60 actually asking very basic fundamental existential questions. Who am I? Who do I now want to be? What is the pandemic meant to be? Very existential kind of questions. And women of the older age, extreme loneliness, because a lot of the old people especially are isolated. Some of them have been so engulfed with fear that they haven't even after 18 months, although they've been vaccinated, the fear has kind of engulfed them that they're unable to come out and mix even with one or two people. I think one thing which I do want to stress is that as a nation, as a collective, we really need to understand that every single one has directly or indirectly been impacted by COVID, and we need to allow ourselves to process this impact, some more traumatic, for some less traumatic. But unless we process this experience and we don't watch out, it is going to play out in the coming years, impacting our youth, which means that there's going to be long-term impact. The closest that I can kind of closest example that I can actually share is if you look at after World War II, there were a lot, and the Holocaust, there were a lot of experiences. All these unprocessed experiences all are almost always transmitted to the next generation. So I think responsibly processing what we've been experiencing is the need of the hour. And I also come from a space that even in education, when we look at the way we're looking only at children missing academics and academia, I think what we are forgetting to account for is 18 months children have lacked social development, which is all and which has milestones. The number of youngsters, just last week I'm hearing the number of young mothers saying that young children, 4 year olds, 6 year olds, etc., already beginning to suffer from social anxiety, cannot deal with a group. That's all because social development has been impacted. And social development is as important or more important than academic development, because social development teaches and guides an individual how to live as an adult in a society.
Yeah. So, many points that you raised there, kids, moms. I think there's a pandemic that mothers have certainly suffered and will see an impact of that play out. But one aspect of what you do in terms of your work leads me to ask the question that for the first time, the pandemic has shown us that mental health isn't just going to stay at the individual level. We need work done at institutional levels, family levels, social systems levels, society levels. How do you see that recognition finally playing out?
I think for me, the fundamental belief is mental health underpins life and living, because it underpins every domain of our life, some very obviously, some less obviously. I think there has been change in the last 18 months that in the way society has viewed mental health. Before, mental health was always viewed from the lens of that it's an individual issue. Today, we cannot look at mental health as an individual issue. We need to look and view mental health as a collective issue. The second thing which is very important is mental health impacts every aspect of our lives. Therefore, several social issues, say, for example, domestic violence, poverty, socioeconomic demographics, all that impacts our mental health. The reason I say this is during the lockdown, the cases of domestic violence had risen threefold. So, no more can you look at social issues in isolation. You have to look at the connect between the impact of social issues on the mental health of the actual individual who's experiencing, and also on the families. For example, if there is a woman who's a victim of domestic violence, she may be the direct victim, but the children in that family become victims. And when the children of that family become victims, they are going to be the youth. And what I keep saying is, if there are children who have been privy and witness in a home where there's been domestic violence, it normalizes for them. So as adults, they become violent. So you can actually see the effect. And therefore, I think what the pandemic has highlighted is that mental health cannot be looked in isolation. And mental health cannot also be looked at as only mental illness, which is the pathology of it. Okay? Mental health covers a large frame. And therefore, I think the time has come for all of us, every stakeholder of society, to sit up and account for mental health issues.
So let's pick from what you just said. Let's not look at mental health as mental illness, which seems to be sort of the approach I think many Indians have, because maybe it's been a taboo. That's one of the reasons. Not been. It is still a taboo, I think. The other side of it is we're looking at medicinal answers. How problematic can that be?
I think stigma, you have to look at three ways. There is public stigma, which has been there for generations. Because of public stigma, there's structural stigma, which is what you were asking about, organizations and corporates and companies having the stigma, which filters down because of public stigma. And then because of these two, you have self stigma. And self stigma happens. So therefore, if I'm not feeling good, if I'm anxious, I am scared to, because of the public and structural. In my mind, also, I have the self stigma, and therefore I refrain from asking for help. So I think education, awareness, and sensitization to understand that mental health needs to be accounted for, and there is nothing to be ashamed of. Just like we seek help when we have, some physical need, just like that we go. And again, I want to reinforce that there's a stigma saying that people who go to therapists are those who are clinically ill. No, you actually go to a therapist. Some go when there's a clinical pathology, but a lot of people actually go to learn how to manage and cope with existing life issues. So I think this is what is very important. And I think education, psychoeducation, to me today is very, very important. And I think everybody needs to understand where what mental health is, and that mental health is not just part of the brain. Mental health is mind body connection, Whatever impacts the mind impacts the body and shows up very differently in different for different people.
That is such a great point at which we could conclude this discussion, the body mind connection. So important to think of it like that and not think of therapy or mental health or yourself as anything that's a reason to believe that it's stigma, but maybe come face to face and seek support. I would say this many times over. It's not as easy said as it's not easy done as said, but at the end of the day, here's somebody with 29 years of experience of having gone through difficult times, and recognizes that pain and difficulties come in all forms and shapes. Anna, Chandy, thanks very much for joining us. I appreciate you being with us here at Reframe.
Thank you, Shaili, and thank you for this opportunity to psychoeducate a larger group and a larger audience.